They gave me a garage key instead of a warm welcome. But what seemed like the worst Christmas ever became the moment I finally found my freedom. At 32, I thought coming home meant redemption. 7 years abroad, and I'd finally made it back for Christmas. What I discovered about family loyalty that December would reshape everything I believed about blood being thicker than water. I stepped off that plane at Chicago O'Hare with my heart hammering against my ribs, clutching a carry-on stuffed with gifts I'd been collecting for months. 7 years. 7 Christmas mornings I'd spent in cramped European apartments, video calling into family gatherings where voices overlapped and nobody could hear me properly. This time was going to be different. This time, I was physically there, ready to bridge the ocean I'd put between us. The first crack in my homecoming fantasy appeared before I'd even collected my luggage. I'd texted the family group chat from 30,000 feet, that giddy message you send when you're finally coming home. Will's down in Chicago. Can't wait to see everyone. The silence that greeted me felt heavier than the December air outside the terminal. No flood of heart emojis from my sister Catherine. No excited responses from my cousins. Just three gray check marks confirming the message had been delivered into what felt like a digital void. Standing at baggage claim, watching the same black suitcase circle past me for the fourth time, I called my mother. Straight to voicemail. The automated voice felt colder than the wind whipping through the terminal's glass doors. I tried my sister next, then my uncle Christopher. Nothing. Each unanswered ring felt like a small betrayal, a preview of something I wasn't ready to acknowledge yet. The Uber ride to Naperville stretched 43 minutes through neighborhoods I'd dreamed about for years. Every familiar landmark, the water tower, the old Dairy Queen, the high school where I'd spent 4 years planning my escape, should have felt like a warm embrace. Instead, they felt like monuments to a life I'd abandoned. The driver, a chatty guy named Mohammed, kept asking about my travels, but I found myself staring out the window, watching my breath fog the glass despite the car's heating. Have you ever walked into a place that used to be home and felt like a stranger? That's what hit me the moment I stepped through the front door of my childhood house. The living room smelled exactly right, that mixture of my mother's vanilla candles and the faint scent of coffee that seemed permanently embedded in the walls. But the silence felt wrong. Devastatingly wrong. I could hear voices floating from the dining room, that familiar symphony of overlapping conversations and clinking silverware that meant family dinner was in full swing. For a moment, standing in the entryway with my suitcase, I felt like I was 12 again, coming home late from soccer practice and missing the beginning of something important. Except this time, I was the something they'd started without. "Hello?" I called out, my voice carrying that slightly uncertain tone you use when you're not sure if you're welcome. The conversations continued uninterrupted, as if my voice had been absorbed by the walls like smoke. I tried again, louder this time. "Hey, everyone, I'm here." The silence that followed felt like the moment between lightning and thunder, pregnant with something inevitable and probably painful. Then my Aunt Patricia's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Oh, look who finally decided to grace us with his presence. Don't expect us to stop everything just because you showed up. If someone had physically slapped me, it would have stung less." I stood there holding my bag, trying to process the venom in her voice, the casual cruelty of it. This was Patricia, who used to slip me $20 bills at family gatherings and tell me how proud she was of my adventures. Now she was looking at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on her shoe. My cousin Mason glanced up from his phone with the kind of bored contempt usually reserved for telemarketers. "Seriously, why are you even here? Nobody asked you to come back." The words hit like ice water. This was Mason, who used to beg me to teach him guitar chords when we were kids, who'd always looked up to me like I was some kind of hero for being brave enough to leave. But it was my mother's voice that truly hollowed me out. Without even looking up from her plate, she muttered, "Just try not to ruin Christmas for the people who actually matter." The casualness of it, the way she delivered that devastating blow while cutting her turkey, will haunt me until the day I die. I scanned the dining room, looking for my place at this table I'd grown up around. Every chair was occupied. Every place setting accounted for. Even the folding chairs we usually brought out for big gatherings were filled with people who belonged. There wasn't even a plate waiting for me. It was as if they'd calculated exactly how many people mattered, and I simply wasn't part of that equation. "Is there somewhere I can sit?" I asked. hating how small my voice sounded, how it cracked slightly on the word sit. My mother shrugged without looking up. We didn't know if you'd actually show up this time. You're not exactly reliable when it comes to family commitments. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Yes, I'd missed some weddings. Yes, I'd had to skip a few birthdays. But every absence had been carefully calculated against flight costs I couldn't afford and vacation days I couldn't spare. Every missed gathering had cost me emotionally in ways they'd never bothered to understand. I'd sent gifts, made video calls, tried to stay connected across an ocean that suddenly felt wider than ever. My uncle Christopher, the family's self-appointed keeper of tradition, barely glanced in my direction. Maybe you can grab something from the kitchen when we're done. That is, if there's anything left. He said it with the kind of dismissive finality usually reserved for settling restaurant bills. The only person who showed even a flicker of human decency was my cousin Rebecca, who tried to squeeze over and make room next to the children's table. But even that gesture felt like charity, a pity offering from the only family member who still remembered I was a person with feelings. Her father, my Uncle James, immediately shut it down. Don't enable him, Rebecca. He made his choices. So I retreated to the kitchen, standing next to the sink like hired help, eating cold mashed potatoes and green bean casserole that had long since lost any appeal. Through the archway, I could hear them discussing me as if I'd already left, as if I were some theoretical problem they were solving rather than a human being standing 20 feet away. Michael always was selfish. My Aunt Patricia was saying, using my name like it tasted bitter. Remember how he just disappeared after graduation? No consideration for how it would affect Mom. He thinks he's better than us now, Mason added. Probably judges our whole lifestyle. Bet he's got stories about how sophisticated Europeans are compared to us small-town people. My mother's voice cut through the others like a knife through silence. I just hope he doesn't start one of his political rants. You know how he gets when he's been around all those liberal Europeans. Political rants? I'd literally said, hello, and asked for a chair. But somehow, in the 7 years I'd been gone, I'd been transformed in their minds into some kind of intellectual snob who looked down on their values. The irony was suffocating. I'd spent those 7 years desperately missing this exact scene. This chaotic family dinner where everyone talked over each other and someone always got offended about something trivial. Every time someone came into the kitchen for a drink or dessert, they moved around me like I was furniture. Invisible, unnecessary, just taking up space. My cousin Mason bumped into me while reaching for a beer and didn't even acknowledge it, just looked annoyed that I was in his way. When I asked about my old room, hoping for some small corner of familiarity, my mother's response was delivered with brutal efficiency. Oh, we converted that into my craft room years ago. Your stuff is in some boxes in the garage. Here's the key. She tossed me a small brass key like she was dismissing a houseguest who'd overstayed their welcome. The garage. 7 years of memories, condensed into cardboard boxes and relegated to the space where we kept lawnmowers and paint cans. Walking out to that garage felt like attending my own funeral. The boxes were labeled in my mother's neat handwriting. Michael's books, Michael's clothes, Michael's misc, sitting on a folding chair between a leaf blower and last year's Christmas decorations. Scrolling through Instagram posts of friends enjoying their holidays, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge what I'd been avoiding all evening. This wasn't home anymore. Maybe it never really had been. The sound of laughter drifted from the house, genuine and warm and completely disconnected from anything I was experiencing. They were having a wonderful time without me. Better than wonderful, they were having the kind of Christmas I'd dreamed about for 7 years, except I was the unwelcome intrusion threatening to spoil it all. When dessert time arrived, I steeled myself for one more attempt at connection. Surely around pie and coffee, with everyone's bellies full and the wine flowing, the evening might soften into something resembling warmth. I walked back into the dining room just as my Uncle Christopher was organizing a family photo. Perfect timing, he said when he saw me, and for a split second, my heart lifted. Maybe this was the moment everything turned around. Actually, maybe sit this one out, Michael. You've been gone so long, people might not even recognize you in 5 years. The laughter that followed his comment wasn't malicious exactly, but it wasn't kind either. It was the kind of laughter that happens when someone says something that's supposed to be funny, but everyone knows is really just mean. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching them arrange themselves for a picture that would become this year's Christmas card, a perfect family portrait that told the story they wanted to remember. I walked out. Not dramatically, not with doors slamming or shouted declarations. I just quietly collected my things from the garage, left the key on the kitchen counter, and drove to the Hampton Inn near the highway. The desk clerk, a tired-looking woman named Sandra, asked if I was in town for the holidays. When I said yes, she smiled and said how nice it must be to be home with family. Lying in that generic hotel bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the highway traffic, I finally let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. This wasn't just disappointment or hurt feelings. This was the death of an illusion I'd been carrying for 7 years. The family I'd been homesick for didn't exist anymore, if it ever had. My phone buzzed around midnight. A text from my mother. "You're being dramatic, Michael. We're family. Be grateful we included you at all." Included me? I'd been treated like an unwelcome stranger, fed scraps in the kitchen, and excluded from the family photo. If that was inclusion, I'd hate to see what rejection looked like. But here's what I learned about human nature that December night, lying in that hotel room planning my next move. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are really just addicted to controlling you. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to be controlled. I didn't respond to that text. Instead, I started making a different kind of plan. The first thing that surprised me about cutting off toxic family members is how quickly they revealed their true priorities. Within a week of Christmas, my phone started buzzing with requests that had nothing to do with reconciliation and everything to do with convenience. My Uncle Christopher needed help with his small business taxes. My Aunt Patricia couldn't figure out why her computer was running slowly. Mason needed someone to co-sign for a car loan because his credit was still recovering from some poor decisions in his early 20s. And my mother, the woman who'd told me not to ruin Christmas for people who actually mattered, needed me to help her navigate some insurance paperwork that was apparently too complicated for an intelligent adult to handle alone. Not one of these requests came with an apology. Not one acknowledged that anything inappropriate had happened at Christmas dinner. They just expected me to resume my role as the family's unofficial IT support and financial advisor, as if the previous week had been some kind of minor misunderstanding we could all laugh about later. The pattern was so familiar it made my chest ache. For years, I'd been simultaneously the family disappointment and the family fixer. Too selfish to come home for every birthday, but somehow still responsible for solving everyone's adult problems from 3,000 miles away. Too stuck up to appreciate their simple Midwestern values, but somehow still expected to be available whenever they needed someone with a college education to navigate bureaucracy. My response to their requests was simple: silence. Not the dramatic silence of hurt feelings, but the practical silence of someone who'd finally learned the difference between being needed and being valued. I'd spent years confusing the two, assuming that because they called me when they had problems, it meant they cared about me as a person. The escalation was swift and predictable. When I didn't respond to the initial requests, they became more urgent. When urgency didn't work, they tried guilt. When guilt failed, they attempted manipulation. The family group chat became a digital battlefield where everyone blamed everyone else for the various crises that emerged when their unofficial problem solver went offline. My Uncle Christopher, facing a tax deadline, sent increasingly desperate messages about how his business might fail if he couldn't file properly. My Aunt Patricia, convinced her computer had been hacked, started calling from different numbers when I blocked her usual one. Mason, whose car loan application was rejected, left voicemails explaining how this was affecting his ability to get to work and support his family. But it was my mother who revealed the most about the family's actual dynamics. Instead of addressing her own request directly, she began orchestrating a campaign designed to make me feel responsible for everyone else's problems. Suddenly, every family crisis was somehow connected to my refusal to help. Christopher's business troubles weren't because he'd procrastinated on his taxes. They were because I was holding the family hostage. Patricia's computer issues weren't because she'd been clicking on suspicious links. They were because I was punishing everyone for my own issues. The gaslighting was masterful in its scope. Within 2 weeks, I'd been transformed from the ungrateful son who'd ruined Christmas into the vindictive manipulator who was systematically destroying the family from within. The fact that I was doing literally nothing, just refusing to solve problems for people who treated me like garbage, somehow made me the aggressor in their narrative. 3 weeks after Christmas, my phone rang at 6 a.m. My mother's voice, sharp with panic. "Michael, we need to talk. Now." She launched into a litany of disasters. The insurance company was threatening to drop her coverage because she couldn't navigate their online portal. Christopher's business was being audited because he'd filed his taxes incorrectly. Patricia was convinced she'd lost years of family photos because her computer was acting strange. Mason was taking the bus to work because he couldn't get approved for financing. "This is what happens when you abandon your family," she said, her voice rising to that particular pitch that had terrorized me as a child. "Your grandfather would be ashamed of the man you've become." The invocation of my grandfather, a gentle man who died when I was 15 and who'd always encouraged my dreams of seeing the world, was designed to be the killing blow. But instead of guilt, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete clarity. "I didn't abandon anyone," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You made it clear what you think of me, so I'm just respecting your wishes by staying out of your lives." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, "You don't get to do this. We're family. You owe us." Those 3 words, "you owe us," crystallized everything I'd been struggling to understand. In their minds, love was a debt I'd somehow incurred by being born into their family. Support was something I owed them, not something freely given and received. Respect was a one-way street where my role was to serve and their role was to judge whether my service was adequate. "I don't owe you anything," I said. "And you've made it clear you don't actually want me around anyway." I hung up before she could respond. The real chaos began when my family realized I wasn't bluffing. For years, they'd trained me to cave under pressure, to prioritize family peace over my own well-being. They'd never considered the possibility that I might simply stop participating in the dynamic altogether. My cousin Rebecca, the only family member who'd shown me any kindness at Christmas, texted me a few days later. "Things are getting really bad over here. Everyone's fighting with everyone. Mom and Uncle Christopher got into a screaming match at Sunday dinner. Aunt Patricia is threatening to hire a lawyer to make Mason pay for her computer repair. Grandma's crying every time someone mentions your name." The description should have made me feel guilty. Instead, it made me feel something I'd never experienced in relation to my family: genuine peace. For the first time in my adult life, their chaos wasn't my responsibility to manage. The final straw came a month after Christmas, when I received a certified letter from the family's attorney. Apparently, my grandfather's small trust fund, something I'd completely forgotten about, required all adult grandchildren to sign off on the annual distribution. Without my signature, the modest payments my relatives had come to depend on for Christmas gifts and vacation funds would be delayed indefinitely. The letter was accompanied by a handwritten note from my mother. "This is your chance to do the right thing. Don't punish the whole family for whatever you think we did wrong." I read that note 3 times, marveling at its complete lack of self-awareness. Whatever I thought they did wrong, as if the public humiliation at Christmas dinner had been some kind of misperception on my part. As if being excluded from the family photo had been an accident. As if being told not to ruin Christmas for people who actually mattered had been a misstatement. My response was typed on hotel letterhead and CC'd to every adult family member. "I will not be participating in any family financial matters or gatherings until I receive written apologies from each person who insulted me at Christmas dinner. All future communication should go through legal channels." The explosion was immediate and spectacular. My phone buzzed constantly for 3 days straight. Angry voicemails, guilt-tripping text messages, and increasingly desperate attempts to reach me through mutual friends and distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. My Aunt Patricia drove to my hotel and caused such a scene in the lobby that security had to escort her out. She kept screaming about how I was destroying the family over nothing, and how my grandfather would be rolling in his grave if he knew what kind of man I'd become. Mason sent a series of increasingly unhinged messages, starting with attempts at negotiation and ending with threats to make me regret my decision. My Uncle Christopher, the family's supposed patriarch, left a voicemail that was simply 10 minutes of him crying and talking about how I was breaking his mother's heart. But my mother's response was the most revealing. Instead of anger or grief, She sent a single text message. "You win, Michael." I hope it was worth destroying everything. The word win told me everything I needed to know about how she'd been viewing our relationship. This wasn't a family conflict to her, it was a power struggle. And in her mind, my refusal to be controlled meant I was somehow attacking her. The final revelation came 2 months later, when Rebecca called me with news I should have seen coming but somehow hadn't. The family had closed ranks against me completely. At Easter dinner, a gathering I would have been automatically included in for 32 years, they'd taken a new family photo. This one included everyone, all the aunts and uncles, all the cousins, even distant relatives who rarely showed up for anything. Everyone except me. "They're acting like you never existed," Rebecca told me, her voice small and confused. "Like you were never part of this family at all. It's creepy, Michael. Nobody mentions your name. Your pictures have been taken down from Grandma's wall. When I asked about you, Mom told me to focus on family members who actually care about us." That night, sitting in my new apartment in Portland, I decided to stay in the States, but definitely not in Illinois. I felt something I had been chasing for 32 years, complete freedom from the need for their approval. They'd finally shown me exactly who they were when the pretense was stripped away. They'd revealed that their love came with conditions, their acceptance had an expiration date, and their loyalty only flowed in one direction. More importantly, they'd shown me that I could survive without them. I could build a life, make friends, find meaning and joy and connection without subjecting myself to their judgment. The trust fund money stayed frozen. My Aunt Patricia's computer remained slow. My Uncle Christopher's business struggled with tax problems. Mason kept taking the bus to work. My mother continued to battle her insurance company alone. And I stopped caring about any of it. If you've lived long enough, you know the feeling I'm describing. That moment when you realize you've been confusing obligation with love, guilt with loyalty, fear with respect. That moment when you understand that the people who claim to know you best might actually know you least. Some people call it burning bridges. I call it lighting the way forward. 3 decades of experience taught me this. The people who truly love you don't need to be forced to treat you with basic human dignity. They don't need legal documents to show you respect. They don't wait until they need something to remember you exist. Family isn't about blood, it's about choice. And sometimes, the most loving choice you can make is to choose yourself. I never sent those written apologies I demanded, because I realized I didn't need them anymore. Their words couldn't hurt me if I stopped giving them the power to define my worth. That Christmas dinner didn't break me, it freed me. And if you're out there reading this, dealing with your own toxic family situation, wondering if you're crazy for wanting basic respect and kindness from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, let me tell you something. You're not crazy. You're not selfish. You're not ungrateful. You're just finally ready to stop accepting crumbs when you deserve the whole meal. The greatest gift I ever gave myself was walking away from people who only valued me when they needed me. Because once I did, I had space in my life for people who valued me simply because I existed. With the wisdom that only comes from hard-won experience, I can tell you this: you don't owe your family your mental health. You don't owe them your peace of mind. You don't owe them access to your life if they're going to use that access to make you feel small. You owe yourself the chance to be loved the way you deserve to be loved. And sometimes, finding that love means having the courage to walk away from the people who taught you to settle for less.